Welcome back, folks. Welcome back to our second module of the workshop, Azure Management. Today, and in this module, my friends, we're going to talk about implementing and administrating storage services, security, storage best practices. You know how this goes, right? Well, remember, my name is Arturo Hamilton. I'll be with you during this session, folks. So please sit back, enjoy the ride, and with nothing left to say, welcome again, and let's get started. The first lesson that we have, my friends, are the storage accounts. For sure, right? I mean, we have to start somewhere, and the storage account is the main service, or the first service that might come to mind when we talk about the storage. This type of service, folks, if you ask any administrator, architect, or even a standard user, you will notice that this is one of the first services that everyone uses, or one of the first approaches that we have to cloud. Okay, usually we go and create maybe a subscription just to have some storage. So the first thing we do is a storage account. That's why this model is so important. Okay, because we will start with something that we usually have as a first experience with cloud. We're gonna see here our technologies, the options, definitions, variables, attributes, tiers, type of storage accounts, and then for sure we will have an extensive demo on how to configure from scratch a storage account. So please, let's get here started and let's watch for our content. The first thing that we have to define before we even start, right, is what is an Azure Storage account, folks? The Azure Storage account, it's an infrastructure as a service, being redundant here with the definition and the acronym, as you know. Well, it's a storage service that can be used not to actually store. I'll explain why. The storage account is a solution interface service that will help you to manage, secure, and have business as usual of the actual storage services. The storage account sits on the top. You get all the services in it, and then you have all those objects to be managed. Okay, it's agnostic to the type of content. This means that you can have audio, you can have video, you can have logs, you can have large multimedia, you can have compressed information, uncompressed information. You can create HTTPS messages. You can create calls. You can use it, for example, to create tables of attributes. You can create file share experiences, blob experiences, etc. All the data we get in the storage account, folks, is available for internal and external purposes. This means that you can access this information from a public HTTP connection using an internet face. Or you can use a hybrid network with a private dedicated circuit, maybe an MPLS, and read the content with a seamless experience for the users and processes. So the Azure Storage account, folks, it's, as I was mentioning before, one of the first things we'll decide to use. It's one of those services that exists in 99% of the subscriptions in the world. That's how important this is. Okay, but let's get now into the specifications and maybe a couple of things before we see the actual process of creation. We're gonna talk about first, before we move forward, about the categories and the tiers. Why is this important? This is important because we have, for example, three different type of top categories. Top categories. A storage account for a virtual machine will be used to keep the disks, the data disk, the operating system disk, anything that you are going to use to provide that storage solution to the computer, to the virtual machines. We will talk about virtual machines further on the road of this workshop, by the way. That's just a spoiler. We also have, for example, a category for structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. If you want to have a database, you can use a storage account. If you want to have a flat file share where you just drop the information for a business process, you have the storage account. That's why it's so important, folks, because the categories are actually going to give us an extensive coverage of the possible scenarios we have to face. Now, there are a lot of different tiers on a storage account. When I say tiers, we're talking about premium and standard. Why did I say it a lot? Because there are scenarios where you will combine. Okay, hold that thought and we'll come back to this idea. But to keep it simple, you have standard and premium. Standard tiers. You're going to have a hard drive, a standard hard drive, at the lower cost per gigabyte. The speed is an average speed. The resiliency, continuity, and service level agreements are standard. That means that maybe some of them won't be available, or you may need to configure something extra to get them. Now, if you get a premium solid state drive, You have out of the box a service level agreement. You have high availability and resiliency in some scenarios. You get the fastest available hardware for storage. You might be thinking, okay, but which one should I use? It depends on your experience. It depends on the actual need of the storage account. For example, if you're going to have a standard computer for small testing and isolated pilots, maybe solid state drive is too expensive for that. You can start with an HDD. On the other hand, you may have an actual requirement of a premium performance for a top tier of production solutions. Well, you go for the SSD. Just to give you an idea, this is an estimate, but a terabyte in standard tier in the East US region will be around 42 US dollars a month. A premium terabyte in the same region will cost between 130 135. So again, the price it's different obviously, but the benefits or the actual usage case of each of them will be the key driver to decide the one you need for your solution. Okay? And now that we understand the tiers and the type of categories we might want to use and the purpose of the storage account, there is something important here that I already mentioned, but it's time to elaborate. The actual storage service. You might be thinking, okay, so we have a storage account that is not a storage service. Yes, let's be clear. The storage service, it's the actual sub-child object of the storage account that will be used to host the information, to store the real information. A storage account will always have to have at least one of these. A storage account itself won't be storing anything unless we select a storage service and we configure it. Well, there are four of these little guys available. We can combine them, okay? We will talk about that later. But the storage service will give us the option of specializing the storage for a specific purpose. For example, think about this. You have a web front end and a backend working application that reads the petitions of the front end. In a standard approach, folks, you will go to that front end, you will execute the transaction, and a message petition will be sent directly to the app, right? If you have, let's say, develop for 100 transactions per minute, and you have 105, you will be good. You might be getting to the limit, or maybe you have a little bit of a comfort factor. What if you get 500 transactions in a minute? For sure, the application will collapse. Or maybe it won't collapse, but you'll have 400 transactions waiting to be taken care of, right? Well, we can put a QE, a message broker in the middle. You have 500 transactions, 500 messages on the QE. These messages are being sent according to the actual processing speed of the application in the back. You receive, you answer, you receive, you answer, you keep the peace. You don't drop messages, you keep them on a QE first in, first out, and you actually optimize the front end experience and the back end experience. That's the purpose of a QE. We also have the chance of using a table. Let's keep it simple, and this is something I always like to use as an example. I mean, a little bit of a rough example, but think about an Excel spreadsheet without the Excel front end. And you have a table. You can use keys. It's a complete NoSQL option. You can have some indexing. You can have some design that will be structured. But you don't have a SQL front end. A real usage of this one, my friends. For example, SharePoint. SharePoint can use custom attributes different from those you have on a standard identity on the Active Directory. Well, what if you need to customize the attributes and read them from a table to populate those values and then use them on a business process, right? Well, the table is there for us. You can put it, refer to it via indexing, and retrieve the values for the SharePoint business process that you had in mind. Easy peasy, right? Then we have one of the favorites, not of myself only, of the actual usage indicators of the world, the blobs. What is the blob? Binary large objects, folks. Think about a large chunk of data that can be accessed based on a specific binary location to read, retrieve, change, and write that position whenever it's needed. Examples of this, we can use blob storage for example, for logs. Think about a constantly increasing log that keeps receiving information on business as usual basis. We can create a Windows as a service experience and put all the possible images, all the possible thick, thin, and semi-thick images for operating systems, disk images. You can use it for multimedia, large pieces of files, maybe videos, maybe audio. You can put a database in here, a backup in here. The blob is optimized for large amount of data. That's the third option that we have. And we have the files. Have you used a file share? Have you configured an SMB file share on-prem? Well, we have the same pre-configured for cloud. We use the server message block protocol to connect to this one, 3.1.2, the latest available secure version that we have. Can be accessed via online or on-prem. The users, and that's the best part of it, can connect to it directly from their computers and map a drive like if it was a network on-prem location. They won't see the difference. It's a seamless experience for them. This is semi-structured to unstructured, but we have the same file share experience we have had for a long run, now available natively in Azure with an out-of-the-box services. And these are the four types of services we can have. Important, and we will see that on the demos. You can optimize your storage account for one of these, for blobs and files, and you get some benefits from it. I'll talk about that later when we see the creation process of our storage account. Okay? So this is the next thing that we can achieve, my friends. If we combine this available type of services with the actual storage account kinds, we have a complete list of variables that we can use to decide the best solution possible. Take a look on the top on the names of this table: blobs, GPV1, GPV2, blob, and file. For example, if you want to optimize a storage account to be used based on a file share experience, you can optimize this for file storage. It will always be premium. Take a look on the second section, performance tiers. The file storage all the way to the right of the table says premium. That means, as I was explaining, that we will have a solid state drive piece of hardware on the back of the file storage, right? We will have the best performance possible, the best access possible, and everything will be a little bit better compared with a standard experience. The thing is that we can only replicate locally or in the zone. I'll talk about this in a second, okay? We can go, for example, remember the example of the previous slide, the message brokering and the attributes. What if you want to have them both, right? What if you want to have tables and queues? Well, you can create a GPV1 or GPV2, general purpose. What's the difference? The difference is the type of replication and the access tiers, not the performance tiers, the access tiers. I'll also explain this in a second, but it's important. What I would like you to get from this table, my friends, is the optimization for a purpose. If you want to go, for example, to create a Windows as a Service repository or to create a login location for events and login administration monitoring, blob, and blob will be the calls. And we know that we have a dedicated tier. You won't be able to create a QE, a table, or a file storage on the blob optimized versions, but you have the best of the best for the blob management. So it depends a lot on what's the purpose of the storage account. When we create the storage account, this is how we define that process. Let's take a look now on how to create our storage account. We'll be moving forward with the demonstration now. So first thing first, let's go to the portal. Remember, portal.azure.com, and we're here, okay? We're going to create a storage account from scratch. I'm going to guide you through all the things that we have. Let me show you. Storage account and create. This is the one we use for the demo of role-based access control of the first lesson of this workshop. Let's take a look here. So select a subscription, select an RG. Remember, a service cannot exist without these two. Okay? First thing first. Then the name. The name of the storage account is critical because it will be used for an endpoint. I'm going to show you that after this demo. The thing of the name is that it has to be lowercase letters. You cannot use special characters, and it always have to be part of a sequence and uniqueness. That means that you can have to use something that hasn't been used on the region. So I'm going to go here and say SA Jump Series 2. Let's use this one. There, we have a name. You can see I have there an error. You see, I had a capital Z and it's sending me an error. So as I said, lowercase. Now, the region. We have, as we explained yesterday, a lot of different regions in the world. Well, select the one that suits your need. I will recommend always to use something close to your location to test, to go for the check, to go for the trials, to go for dev, whatever you actually need to do. So I'm going to start here with is US. Okay. And then remember what we were talking about on the tiers and stuff? Here we have them. Standard or premium. You can actually see a note that says GPv2 recommended for most of these scenarios. As I was explaining, if you don't have a specialized requirement, the GPv2 will do the trick. Okay, so we can start with that one, or we can go premium. You can see how it changes. I have file shares and blobs if I select premium. Why? Because this is optimized for those type of files or that type of information data. If I keep it on standard, you can see here I have general purpose too now. Okay? So that's the first decision you have to take. Then we have something called the redundancy. And this is a critical part that we were mentioning in here on the replication at the bottom of the table. What can we do with redundancy? Redundancy refers to the feature where we will be able to have copies of our data to protect in case of an outage, or maybe just to provide resiliency, service level agreements of recovery processes, etc. The redundancy is given by default in some scenarios, but we can also have the chance of deciding the type of each one that we want. In this case, for example, the redundancy is about creating copies of my information locally on the area, on the region, geographically distributed, or even with a read access if needed. Take a look on the replication that I was mentioning. We have 4 different types of replications: local, geo, zone, and geo zone redundant storage with reading. Okay, what's the difference? When we create a local redundant storage, folks, we will have on the same data center of the same region, we will have up to 3 copies of my information on the storage account available. We cannot read from it, but can be used for resiliency, continuity, high availability, and some other scenarios. So, as you can see in the description, if the rack, if the server, if the drive fails, we will have that replica around the building on the isolated data center. First one. Second one, and I'll jump to zone before geo. Zone redundant storage, folks, will have the 3 copies in different data centers of the region. Remember that I explained the data centers on the first module of the workshop, right? We have isolation and independent power supply. We have independent network connections. We have a complete independent cooling system. So if the building by any means has a failure and the whole data center goes down, we still have our copies in a different data center on the region. Option number 2. For the third option, we have the geo-redundant storage, the GRS. This specific type of redundancy, my friends, is about creating like a failover experience where you have copies of your data in a different region than the primary one you selected. You go there and you have the 3 copies based on a paired region. This means you have similar geographies, similar capacities. It's in a specific distance between your region and the secondary region. And in case of a failure on the whole region where you got your storage account, you have the chance of using that secondary location. And the final one is a combination of zone and geo redundancy. When you have critical data on the storage account that it's supposed to be running 99.99% of the time on the SLA, the best practice is to use this one. You have copies divided between zones and regions, and you have up to 6 copies available across 2 different regions on the Azure distribution. You can select any of these, or well, based on the combination of attributes, the one that you need for your service. So I'm going to start with redundancy, and we're ready to go now to the advanced settings. On the security tab, You can see the first thing that we have, it's a secure transfer. Every storage account we create by default will be mapped to use HTTPS connections, as you can see here on our descriptions. So if by any means, by a legacy device, legacy system, legacy line of business applications, you require to use connectivity without HTTPS, not recommended, hear me out, it's not a best practice, but might be needed, we can always uncheck this one. By default, again, this is always the case. Based on the type of infrastructure that we are, we will be based and given with the option of using encryption at infrastructure level. It's not available for all the subscriptions. It depends on the type of subscription. But what happens here is that you offer an extra layer of encryption, physically speaking, on the infrastructure location where is host your storage account. For regulatory and compliance, this is usually needed. By default, as you can see, I cannot select it. Okay? This is another option that we have. If we scroll down a little bit, we have develop public access. I'm going to show you this later today on a different demonstration, but basically what we're doing is that this storage account will be compatible if we want and we need to public anonymous requests. That means that you, my friends, listening to this workshop, will be able to connect if you have the proper connection string without being part of my domain, without being an authorized user. Why? Because I'm enabling public anonymous access. Okay? That's another thing that we have. The next checkmark that we have here, the share access keys, folks, it's an option that we have to create temporary access keys that will be used via URL and token to get a direct connection to the storage account. Okay, I'm going to keep this enabled, and later today when we have the storage ready, I'll show you how to create this and how you can share them to be accessed via any endpoint that we want to enable. Talking about HTTPS, we also have a security definition here, the minimum TLS. Remember, by default now, the best practice says that we should always use 1.2. Nevertheless, we follow the same principle of HTTPS that we had here on the top. If you have a legacy process that requires the usage of 1.0 or 1.1, you can still use them. It's not recommended. It's actually a bad practice if you can avoid it. Okay? That's just a recommendation in here, folks. You can see by default. If this storage account we're going to be used for data lake is a way of processing big data. That's a different topic. But if we wanted to process big data R and analyze those chunks directly on a data factory service, well, we can confirm and configure this specific storage account to be a data lake storage like this. In this case, we need it for general purpose, right? So we're not going to use it. And then check this. We have customization of advanced management for an optimized service. Remember I said we had the option of selecting specific services to be used, blob and file. Well, if you remember, if you recall from here, we're using general purpose, right? Well, nevertheless, we still have the chance of configuring a couple of things in here. What we have for the blob storage, as you can see, we can optimize this to be a specific type of storage tier. We have hot, cool, and archive based on the type of optimization. In here you can see hot and cool because this is a general purpose storage. If we have created an optimized blob storage account, we will also have the option of archiving directly on the service. What's the difference between these? The price. Hot, it's cheaper per transaction but more expensive per gigabyte, while cool has like a mid-term price, and archive is the cheapest per gigabyte but the most expensive per transaction. When you go into archive mode, keep in mind that retrieval times might take up to 24, 48 hours. You have to rehydrate the content that you have there, so it's not immediately available. Hot and cool will give us a faster time of response. So based on the criticality and the actual retrieval expectation you have, hot and cool might be the option, or you can go into archive for an extended backup, a long-term retention, an auditing log, etc. Now about the Azure files, we also have the chance of deciding if the file share that we're going to create on this storage account will host a large amount of information. Voila, we have this optimized. This specific checkmark is about optimizing the allocation of hardware. So we don't actually see it on the front end, but on the back end, the hardware will be optimized, distributed, and configured according to the needs of a large amount of information to be transferred. Okay, this can be enabled later. I mean, it's not like you don't know exactly the expected amount of data right now. You have no foresight, right? You don't know what will happen in the next days or the next weeks or the next years. Well, you can keep it up small, and we will change this later on the road. And if we have tables and queries, we also have the chance of supporting CMK for advanced management. As you can see, that's also based on the subscription. These are some of the advanced settings that we have. Let's keep moving forward. Let's go now to network. We're going to talk about this in detail. We'll be back on the slides in a few minutes and we will see a couple of topics about this, the theoretical knowledge we need. But let me explain to you the options that we have. We can use the network tab for different type of things, especially connection and routing. The connectivity method refers to how are we planning to expose the connection? How are we planning to connect? For example, public endpoint is about accessing the storage account regardless of our location. Anywhere we are will work and will let us connect as long as we have obviously the permissions and the endpoint, right? Well, that's one. Public endpoint with selected networks. From an internet endpoint, you'll have to get into a network, a private virtual network of Azure. From that virtual network, the endpoint will be authorized and you'll be able to access. For a private endpoint, folks, you have to be connected directly on the network specified by the storage account to be used. This means that I have to use a VPN, an express route circuit, any option I have to get into the network, or even better, connect to a computer, a virtual machine on the network, and use that computer to jump into the storage account. This is a way of creating a private layer of security over the storage account. I'll show you how this works later today once the storage account is ready. The other option we have is the routing. How are we planning to get our traffic into the storage account from endpoint to endpoint within or outside of Azure? By default, we have Microsoft routing. This means we use the actual backbone of the storage accounts and the Microsoft data centers in the world. But we can also use internet-facing routing if by any means we have to control the encryption, we have to map maybe the hubs, or there is something we have to get evidence from, well, we might have to use internet routing. These are the two options that we have. I'm going to leave them as default, and we will configure this later if needed. Let's go now to the data protection. The data protection options are about keeping our information protected in case of an accidental deletion or given the chance to recover in case of a misconfiguration or even a deletion that we didn't expect us to have to be recovered in the future, right? That, well, might happen. We can turn on a point in time restoration for containers being blobs, and select how often or how far behind we will bring back a blob container if needed. By default, we always have 7 days enable a soft delete. Think about this like if it was a recycle bin. You have 7 days to recover a delete blob before it's permanently delete, and then there is nothing else to do. We can do the same for containers. If we sign up with our subscription and we have that enabled, we will be able to have the complete container, not only the file. Remember, the container is like the folder and the blob is the file. We can do the same also for a complete folder by using the containers. It also exists, as you can see, for file shares. Okay, so we can have by default again a recycle bin experience for the files inside of my file share whenever they are removed or deleted by accident or intention. We can track the versions of the blobs. That means that every time there is an update, we will be able to use the versions to restore from it, to recover from it. Maybe we want to roll back one change that is not longer needed. Well, we can use this versioning. Important. Keep in mind the versioning uses space, and keep in mind the space has a cost. Okay, that just in case you were thinking, why don't we have that by default? Well, the reason is because we have to consider the amount of changes, the volume of size of those changes, and obviously the impact on the price. At the end of the day, we're going to have all the changes here tracked, and we'll be able to monitor the modifications and objects in order to have a proper lifecycle management of my information. These are our protection settings for data. And finally, my friends, and something we mentioned yesterday when discussing the management and governance of information, the tags. As we explained in previous modules, my friends, the tags are meant to be used to create metadata labels on our services, on our resources, for billing purposes, reporting purposes, tracking purposes. Check now how we can use them. Keep an eye on what I'm about to do because this is important to have a proper management of tags. I'm going to go here and say name, for example, division. Sorry, here, division. I'll have here IT. I'm going to go here and say language. Let's say language of usage, right? I'm going to go here and say English. You can see Spanish. Do you see an error because of the slash? No, even better. I'm going to put a tag in Spanish. Is this in Spanish? You can see here. This is a question. It's in Spanish. I have an accent and a special character. If I go here and say yes, it's in Spanish. Do you see an error? Do you see a warning? Do you see anything here happening that seems to be pointing out that I'm not using a standard? No. We have to be careful with the tags, okay? Because the moment I save this, these tags will be available to be used in other services in the future. We will see when I create the virtual machine on the next modules of the workshop, you'll see how I can use the division one. I'm going to keep the division 1 in there. Okay, so just in case we actually need to use it. And this will be just remove, so we won't use it if needed. Okay, so these are the tags that we can create, folks. This is a bad practice. Okay, do not create tags without standardizing or having an actual plan of management for future usage and reutilization of the tags. We're going to keep it up with division, and later when we go to virtual machines in the different module of these topics, we will see how to use this one in there. So we're good. Let's check what we have. You can see everything seems to be ready. We have everything that we configure in here. I think I'm good now. Let's hit create and let's wait for the storage account to be available. The storage account, folks, doesn't take that long to be available. It might take less than 5 minutes. It's a usual expected time. There might be reasons based on the configuration that will increase this, but usually with 5 minutes we have enough. You can see here on the deployment the thing or things that are being deployed. In this case, its a storage account has been accepted. It's time to create. And just like that, every other service or characteristic I added that requires to be created will be here. So check this. The storage account is ready. Go to the resource, storage account jump series 2, easy peasy, we're good to go. There's our storage account ready to be used. Now that we have it, let's go back to the slides for a couple of minutes so we can actually configure and control some of the other attributes. Remember I was mentioning the access. The red part of this URL that you see on my screen, it's the one that uses the name. Remember when we were naming our storage account, I said it's important you have lowercase letters, unique characters and numbers. Do not use special characters or capital letters. The reason behind that is that a host name will be created that will be used with the domain that we have added for the storage account. Just in case you're wondering, you can change these domains to have something unique for your organization. Don't worry. This is the default creation. You can see, in this case, will be something like SA Jump Series 2 .blob.core.windows.net. That will be the URL to connect. Okay? This is the full access. I'm going to show you how to secure the access in a couple of minutes, but this is the first approach to accessing our storage. Now, we mentioned the network, right? We mentioned that we were capable of using a specific type of attributes to configure the access. If you remember, when configuring the network tab, I kept the old network's public access. I'm going to change this now to show you how this changes, how this affects the experience. Okay? This configuration or these changes, my friends, can be done directly from the GUI. You can use Azure CLI or Azure PowerShell. And the idea is that, well, whatever you feel comfortable with will give you the chance of configuring the traffic from a specific network or vNetwork into your storage account. Something important, when we're granting the access, we have the chance of using a specific softnets in our subscription to have that access we want. Examples. What if you are responsible of creating the storage accounts, but you are not supposed to see or use the content? You're going to create a storage account for human resources, and then they will use file sharing it. You can create the storage account. You can modify the service of the storage account. You can actually give the permissions and things they need. But the actual content won't be visible for you unless you are on the human resources virtual network. That's the scope and the purpose of this one. Okay? You can also be specific and say, hey, give me that access, but only to a specific IP range. You can define a complete segment of IPs or a specific IPs one by one to say from on-premises or from cloud, these are the only IPs that can read the content of my storage account. This is also an option that we have. At the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to configure the access. So we can even extend and say an on-prem network with a VPN that reaches my virtual network in Azure will also have the access given the IP it's using or the IP used by the virtual network endpoint that is given to the local on-premise network to actually have the requirement successfully deployed. But enough talk. Let's see how do we configure this on the storage account. Let's get back to our portal here. Under settings, my friends, you have an option that says networking. And as you can imagine, this is where all this magic will take place. Check this. Based on the configuration I selected when creating the storage account, this is all networks by default. I can change this when creating, or I can change it now that it's already deployed. I can go here to selected networks. You can see here, add an existing network. For this purpose, I have created a VNet1 with a softnet called storage softnet. I'm going to click enable. It's going to enable an endpoint for this softnet. You can see it's there, and I'm going to click on add. I can add my IP address in here just to have the access that I need. I can select a specific ranges if it's needed to. If I have a specific range of IPs to access publicly besides the virtual network and the softnet we have here, I can add them in here. I can create some exceptions. I can create the routing. Remember, I can use internet facing routing whenever it's needed, and I'm ready to go. Right now, there won't be a change. Why is that? Because I'm adding my public IP. That means I still have the access. I'll show you after a while when we create the blob storage how this changes if I don't have the public IPs and only the softnet as the connection option. Okay, so I'm gonna click save and we will have now the network configured for our storage account. We can go back here. It's already saved. It's asking to save again. Well, let's do it twice. Let's go back here and we're good. Okay, we have the storage account now with a network configuration. The next thing we can configure, folks, are the shared access signatures or SAS. A shared access signature will actually give us a unique way of connecting via URLs and URIs with a specific token created just for an access. The benefit of it is that you can set different settings and attributes to have more control. For example, when it starts and when it ends. If you want to access only a specific piece of storage, a specific container, or just to read the content of a file share, you can do this. You can have a combination to say, hey, only read the blob files in all the containers, not the containers, get the access for 7 days, and you have a read permission only. If you do that, you have by default a controlled access via the URI we are generating. Let's see. Back to the portal, and we click on Share Access Signature. Once on the Share Access Signature, you can see the first thing is the service. Let's use the example I gave. We're going to read only the blobs only the files objects. We're not going to read the service or the container folders. You will only be able to read the content. You cannot delete the versions. You will have this permission by default is 6 hours. I'm going to give you this permission for 24 hours. Okay, so let's go here up to tomorrow at 2 p.m. Let's select Central Time. We're already in Central Time, but let's go here for, it's under 6, right? We're, yes, -6. Here we are. Central Time US in Canada. You can even say only these IPs, and I'm only going to let you read if you use HTTPS. Remember, security first. Okay? We are going to create this URI on a specific sign-in key. I'm going to explain this access sign-in key in a second. And you can see we have to generate. Check this. I have a connection string, a token, and the SAS of the URL. You can see here what I was saying. The name, .service, core windows.net, and then all the attributes configured for this to work. We can now copy, share, and use them to connect. But now, this is quite easy, as you can see. I mentioned something called the signing keys. What are these? Let's go back here. The signing keys are also called access keys. The access keys, folks, are the service that we will use on the top to encrypt the shared access signatures, the URIs, the permissions, and tokens. We have two of them in every storage account. Okay, this access key will be holding all the access given via URIs and shared access signatures. It encrypts by default with AES 256 bits, so it's actually quite powerful. These keys are used to encrypt and decrypt on the moment we start and the moment we end the processes. You can find them here. Access keys. Oh, sorry, we have to save this one. It's already there. Yes, access keys. And you can see here, key 1 and key 2. If I think this is compromised or I want to restore the whole encryption and connection processes, just like this. It's regenerated and now we have a new one. You can show the actual content and you can see we have a real key and a connection string for that key to be used. These are options of security that we can add to any storage account regardless of the type, tier, or use that we selected at the beginning of the creation. And now that we have understood a little bit about security and how to configure the networks, it's time to talk about something that is also important for the storage management, our replications. We already talked about this, but I want to have some time just to clarify the things that we mentioned so you can grasp to the understanding of this. Remember, local, zone, and geo replication. Geo replication with zone or geo replication only on geographic locations. Remember, local, it's the replication available for everything that will have 3 copies in a single data center, isolated by, as we said, power supply, cooling systems, and network. Zone replication, 3 copies in different data centers within the same region. Okay, we have 2, 3 data centers available in the region. Well, the data will be replicated in different locations. So in case of a failure of one of the buildings, we can retrieve the other. Global replication, remember region pairs, 3 copies in the region and 3 copies on a secondary region, independent from the first one we selected. And finally, GeoZone. Remember, you have the copies within first and second region across different zones, so you can use data centers and distributed geography to ensure the continuity of a critical business storage requirement. This is something we already configured. This cannot be changed after the storage account was created. Remember that. Okay? These are the things that we can configure whenever we need to have the replication. Only when we are setting up for the first time the storage account before we start the deployment. Now, we can also secure it by using AD authentication, Active Directory. The storage can be accessed using auth tokens, as we have mentioned before, and online authentication. The token is created directly by the Azure Active Directory and then is passed and sent as a request of access to the actual storage account. This uses an identity of Azure Active Directory. You can manage this access directly, the same as the role-based access control or directly as the access management here. You can add specific accesses to specific users like we did on the module of identities, adding a role assignment in here for advanced permissions, or you can use the actual access given to each of the objects, for example, the containers, just as a demo, from the control and the policies. We will see details of this on the management data lesson, something that it's about to start on the next minutes, but this is just to give you some context about the features and the fundamental understanding of the storage accounts. So now let's talk about the actual management of our information. We have seen all the setup, the attributes, the best practices. It's time to actually administrate our data. The first thing we need to know is how do we get data into Azure, right? Well, there are a lot of options. We can directly upload into the storage account. We can go and create some services. We can maybe copy from an existing location, or even better, we can import our data into it. There are a lot of cases where you have a lot of information that you want to put in cloud, where you actually have the need of migrating gigabytes or terabytes that might take down your bandwidth if you do via direct upload, right? Well, how can I do this? You can actually connect the data using a dedicated circuit. You can use a gateway to put it on-prem and then move on cloud, or even better, you can ask for a drive that Microsoft will ship to you that you can then connect, or ship your own disk to Microsoft that their engineers will connect to the data center, to the server, and then copy and put your data where it's supposed to be. This is an import and export service. You can get data from Azure or get data into Azure regardless of the size. From a couple of hundred gigabytes up to a petabyte, we have the chance of playing around with these different options. This can be achieved by using jobs. Okay? You have to prepare the disk. This means that you have your actual disk where you have the data, create the job and ship it to Microsoft. Microsoft will receive the disk, will send it to the Azure region you selected. They will connect it to the actual server where the storage account got created, copy your information, and ship it back. You have the disk, you can use it for whatever you want now, but your information will be now in cloud. The other way around, we can create the job, ship an empty disk, and then Microsoft will connect the disk, transfer your data, and send it back to you. Receive the disk, all the data you wanted, use it, copy it, process it, and release the space of the disk if needed. Microsoft will take care of the shipment, the security of the information, and obviously will track down the package, in this case the shipment, until you get it to your door. These are the two options that we have. But how do we configure this? Well, from the portal, you can go for import and export jobs. You can see here, select option to create a new job. It's the same starting process for both. You're going to select here, where do you want it? On my resource group. This will be, for example, an import demo. You can see here, I can select export, okay? Not much of a change in here. The details, you need to upload a journal file. This is created on the drive that you are going to ship. Without this, you cannot proceed to the creation. I don't have one right now because I don't have that amount of data to be journal, but this is a mandatory step. You select the region. You can see here the storage account we created on this module. Select all the attributes of shipping. You can select here the number, the contact information. Remember the tags? Well, they're back. You can see what I said. The division is here now. And create. Easy peasy. The only relevant part that you need, remember, it's all the shipping information, as you can see here, and also the actual journal that maps the information you are planning to send on the shipment. This is how you do it. It's pretty straightforward, folks. The same apply for both. Let me show you here on export. We have the same from where, what would you like to get? The containers or everything? Everything. Then the same, the shipment information and the tags. So this is a straightforward, intuitive method of getting a lot of data or retrieving a lot of data from Azure without compromising functionalities, times of load, workloads, or even the bandwidth that might impact on the service performance of your organization. So let's go back here to our slides. So there is another thing that we have called the Storage Explorer. There are two versions of this. There is an online storage explorer and a desktop storage explorer. This is basically a front-end interface that we can use to configure, manage, and monitor our storage accounts. As you can see on this screenshot, you have all the storage accounts from your subscription, and you can actually monitor the services and objects within them, like if you were using a file explorer but completely built and dedicated for the storage account management. It's compatible with Windows, Mac OS, and Linux devices, and can also be used to manipulate and work with data lakes, big data, data factories processes, and Cosmos DB storage. If we go back to the storage account that we created for this specific lesson, we can open here our Jump Series 2. Take a look on the top, right in the middle. We have here the option of Explorer. This is the Storage Explorer. I can download the Storage Explorer here on-prem and install it. We're going to go here and say, get me this one. You can see it's been installed there. Once ready, we will be able to connect this to our Storage Explorer. Let's see how we install this. We executed it. It's running here. Install for me or for all the users. Accept the agreement and click install. Location, and we have it. The Storage Explorer, after installation, will be ready to load my solution. Let's wait for it to be complete, and then we can go back here to our storage account. Well, while we wait, let's open here our storage account. We're back here, and we're good to go. It's waiting for it to be complete, right? So in the meantime, while we wait, check this. We have an online storage explorer. You can see here my blobs, my files, my queues, and my tables. If you remember on the blob by default, we have the logs. So that's not visible because it's an out-of-the-box object created on the containers. It's private and it's completely available, we want it or not, in every storage account for general purposes. So once the Storage Explorer is ready on the desktop, we'll be ready to use it. So we will wait here just a couple of seconds and we will be back. So as you can see now, our Storage Explorer is ready. So we're gonna click Finish after it's complete, and you can see it's now loading, right? Well, it's the first setup. It's now available in here. And you can see we have the whole navigation page ready to be used. This is not connected yet. I can go here and connect. You can see it's asking me to connect now. So I'm going to add one of my accounts. I'm going to grab here Azure Active Directory and Azure account. I'm going to click Next. It's asking me to authenticate. So we're going to use here our account subscription. Here goes our account. Let me just type down our password. There we are. Complex password always, my friends. Do not hesitate or get cheap on the passwords. Always use complex passwords whenever possible. So you can see it's authenticating to the back. There it is. Our account is ready, and you can see on the Azure Pass, we can start adding our subscription. So guess what? Azure Pass, that's a subscription we have. It's loading. You can see here my jump series that we created, the disks that we created, we're good to go and start working with it. That's the whole purpose of using the Storage Explorer, to keep an on-prem solution to manage the information of my objects. So this is another option that we have for advanced management. And the final management option that we have before we get into the actual services, it's the Azure copy or the AC copy. Okay, this is a command line interface completely free that we can use to create packages, automate via command line interface, and create some scripts to have a little bit of improvement or automation over the data processes, right? This can be executed on PowerShell with AC copy, or we can use the Cloud Shell in Azure to execute this specific part. Both scenarios are valid. The idea is to automate all the processes we have discussed and all the things that we can do, but with a command line interface. So this is our second lesson of the module, folks. Thank you very much for your time. After this, we will talk about the Azure files and the Azure Blob. In this third lesson, folks, we will talk about the services. We have been talking about management, data protection, security, configuration, setting up, some attributes, importing, front-end tools, third-party tools, etc. Well, it's time to talk about the actual storage service, and that, my friends, are the files and blobs. We have others, but these are the two mainly used services around the world to create our storage solutions within an Azure subscription. So let's take a look what we have in here. So as we already mentioned, folks, we have the services that we actually use for storage in our storage account, right? The files and the blobs. So when we talk about files and blobs, as we explained already on a previous slide in a previous lesson, remember, the blob will always be optimized for cloud. Every time you have the need of a large piece of information being saved in cloud, you can trust on a blob storage. You don't need to worry about using, for example, an advanced cloud management. You don't need to use an structured solution, indexes, keys, foreign encryption, foreign management, nothing at all. Okay? What we have in here now, it's the usage of a blob storage directly into the storage account as we have seen for our access. On the other hand, if you need to use an SMB and provide a seamless experience to your users so they can actually connect without noticing that the information is in cloud and interacting the way have done since 2000, 2005, well, we have the file storage solutions. So when to use this? If you have the need of creating a solution to store large amount of information completely unstructured like multimedia files, like a repository for videos and streaming services, like a large log that can catch every single piece of activity of your platform, or even better, a Windows as a service solution where you can have multiple images, your call will be the blob storage. On the other hand, if you have the need of creating a seamless experience for your users where they can actually connect via intranet or third-party services like SharePoint to a library or a folder where you have a lot of information without they actually going through the cloud interface, our call will be the file storage with the optimized version of the SMB. So in order to actually create one of these services, we're going to start with the file share. Let's see how to create it. We have two options. We can create the file share directly from the moment we create the storage account and optimize it for it, or we can create the file share in an existing storage account or a general purpose storage account. Let's take a look. If we go back to the portal, if we open again the storage accounts and we click new, or well, create, in here, you have the option of going premium and selecting a storage account. This one will be optimized. Well, it's responding back. It seems to be a little bit there. Sorry. We can see here file shares, storage account, right? So this is an option to create it optimized for it with the whole purpose of using the storage account for that. But if we already had a storage account, we can go here, open the one we already had, select on the file services the file share, click on new, FS demo, select the size, and remember, based on the type of transactions or the volatility of information we're planning to handle, we can select different storage accounts from here. If we need to have a storage account that will have constant traffic, we might want to go for transaction optimized. If we know that the information will be sitting on the back and will be used in some scenarios, we can go for hot or cool. We can even go for archiving some options for blobs, not for file storage. We click create and we have a new file. Okay, that's the option number one. So we have the complete storage account, and after that we have the file share where we have added our services. Now that we have the file share, we can use it. Check this. I can go here, I can click upload, I can select something from my objects, upload it, and use it. You can see is now fully functional. I can connect to this one, as we were saying. I can select here to be Windows, Linux, or a Mac OS device, and you can see here We have the required script to do it, and we're good. But before we proceed, do you remember the networks? When we talk about networks, we said that we were going to have access because I explicitly selected my IP, right? Check this. If I go back to networks, I can go here and remove my public IP. I can save. Let's wait here a couple of seconds. Let's go all the way from the top. Storage account, file shares, file share, and we have the access still. In the next 2 minutes, this usually takes up to 5 minutes to replicate. My public IP will be rejected. Why? Because we haven't actually added that as allowed. Okay, so unless I'm connecting from this virtual network, I won't be able to use it. So let's see if it replicate now. You can see I don't have the access. I'm the one who created this. I'm the one who actually defined this, but guess what? I cannot access here. So this is like the final part of the demonstration that we had with networks. Now that we have file services inside of the storage account, I'm going to go back. I'm going to grab again the networks. I'm going to go here, add my IP, and save it. We're good. Yes. And I'm going to close this, and we're back. And again, in 5 minutes, I'll be able to see again the information of my file share available. There, we're back. So this was another thing that we were trying to do earlier today. Remember? Well, there is another service that we will talk about that it's called the Azure File Sync service. The Azure File Sync service, folks, it will basically give you the option to share information or to share data replicating from on-prem and cloud or cloud to on-prem to be accessible via SMB or NFS shares. This means that a server can connect to an Azure File Sync and get all the information directly available wherever it is in the world, as long as we use the service in an Azure data center. For example, you have a server, let's say in the head office. Let's put this in New York. You use the Azure File Sync. The people connecting directly in Singapore or India, all the other around the world, well, will be able to consume this directly from the File Sync service. This is the objective of this option. It has a few components to remember. The executable, it's the actual service running on the background responsible for this to happen. Starting sessions, stopping sessions, monitoring the services. The storage sync.sys, or the system file, it's the one that will be used as a filter to keep the files as cold when they are not using. That will reduce the cost and obviously will give more capacity to perform to the hot access requirements. And all the PowerShell commands that we might want to use are also compatible with this one. This, my friends, it's the Azure File Sync servers that we can use to optimize the real-time connection to different endpoints. And finally, after all the things we have been mentioning in this module, there's still one thing that we haven't seen working, right? There is one thing that we have been mentioning a lot, but we haven't seen in action. Well, that's our blob storage. Remember that the blob storage is optimized for the large chunk of data, okay? We have everything ready to be used on the binary large objects. Now, we have the storage account in the middle, okay, between the user and the information. The user will connect to that specific object using a container. The container can be considered a folder, a way of creating group of information. And inside of it, we have the blobs, the blob being the object or the file. When we create a blob storage, let me show you here, we can go back to the series. We can open our container. We can create a new one and say blob dem. Remember the access we explained when we were creating the objects? Well, if we keep it private, only users that have been authenticated will have the access. If we go for the blob, our read access level will be given to the option on the right, the blob file, the cat's #1 movie, the me JPG, the Jew JPG. If I change this to container, the actual anonymous permission will be given to the videos and image folders and also to the content inside of them. I'm going to go here and say, blob, no, private, create, and we have a new container. If we open it, we can now upload information. And remember, this is unstructured, so I can grab, for example, this one, get it here, and it's working now as a blob. You can grab the file, see the type of blob that got created. You can see it's a blob, and you can then change the tier. Remember the tiers? Well, to wrap it up, folks, we can go for a tier optimized for access. We can go for a tier optimized for storage. Keep in mind that if I move this one, for example, in here, and I go to archive, I have this one in a dehydrated mode that might take hours or even days to bring it back online. Use this when the file won't be asked to be retrieved in a fast approach scenario. Okay, that's a pretty important thing to keep in mind. So I'm gonna go here and say save. We have this in archive now. We can go back to our object. You'll see the access tier has changed, and our object now is archived on the back. And these, folks, it's the bluff and the final part of our session. I would like to thank all of you for taking the time from being here today with us during this module. I'll see you the next time. I hope that all of you join back to the next topic of this workshop series of Azure Management. Remember, my name is Arturo Hamilton, and I'll talk to you until the next time. See you.